Hello, and welcome to the What Inspires You podcast. My name is Paul.
And I'm Brandon. Join us as we rediscover wonder through inspiring conversation. Well, I think I've started the past few episodes,
That is an accurate statement.
which I think leads me to demand that
Insist.
I insist strongly worded letter that maybe a new person.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be you. I'm just saying it shouldn't be me.
Ball, get back here. Yeah, goes first. I can agree to those terms.
Mm-hmm.
I'll allow it.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, my inspiration is the idea of grace, and so I should have done a lead-up question like you did.
Oh yeah. You got to
Oh.
paint me a story from history and make me choose something.
I'll just ask what your definition is of grace first, and you can go from there.
Well, the classic churchy definition that I feel like I always hear pastors say is that grace is when you're not only forgiven, the debt is taken away, but the addition of there's also blessing or benefit on top of it. So it's like you had sins, you no longer have sins anymore. Those have been removed, and you're in the family of God. God blesses you now. You have like added things to your life.
Interesting.
That's been the classic definition of grace that I have been indoctrinated with most of my life.
Let me indoctrinate you with a new
So,
definition.
and yeah, I've never honestly really looked further than that. So
Yeah.
I'm only surface deep here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm talking about the name Grace.
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
I hate that name. No, no, it's a great name.
It's great. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just something I've been kind of exploring in my own life, trying to figure out, what it, like, what does it practically look like? And for me, it's very much in a spiritual context. Like, I think you can ultimately have, grace in a situation, which is, I would see as kind of acting in a way that is like empathetic in a little, in some ways. It's like patient, that's understanding. It's like, people, or you could think of it like, someone moves gracefully. It's like they're moving with like gentleness and kind of flow and these kinds of things. So I think there's, obviously aspects outside of just the spiritual side of things. But for me, the spiritual side is the most interesting. Because I don't know how to frame it exactly, but so as I was talking to you a little bit earlier, we were talking about the behavioral aspect of of training people, as far as for my new job and working kind of with kids to teach behaviors and all this kind of stuff. And there's a very underlying mechanistic approach to it where you kind of, if you put in a prompt or, whatever, and you give a certain response or a certain reward, it's like behavior's kind of changed. And it's like a pretty scientific approach to it. It's like, there's not a lot of, there might be factors that contributed to that process taking longer or shorter, but like ultimately the idea is that, if you just do these things long enough, you can train people into anything, essentially, or change behaviors into anything you want. There's actually some really crazy scientists in the 1900s, that kind of got on board with this, where like, and just did weird experiments on kids, on animals and stuff. And they're like, yeah, I mean,
Pavlov's dogs.
Stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, that guy was a freak, but
Just electrocute them. See what happens.
oh, he was doing even more than that.
Yeah.
Like I won't get into too much graphic detail, but the whole idea of how he found out dogs were salivating was because he was they were harvesting dog stomach bile to sell as a digestive agent for people.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so, to get
That's fascinating.
bile built up, he was doing other stuff with food, and then he noticed the salivating as like a byproduct. But that's what everyone remembers him for.
Oh my gosh.
Even though he was just trying to fund his research and had a bunch of dogs on hand.
Wow.
And he was a behavioral scientist, but
Yeah.
so
So science is weird.
Oh yeah.
It's a lot of weird stuff that where we come to our conclusions.
Yeah.
You
it
read a
just
stat and it's like, how did we get to that stat?
exactly. Yeah. And even the behavior of, it's like the fact that a lot of this practice now is built off what these scientists did. It's like, it makes me kind of uncomfortable. It's like,
Mm,
you just hear these quotes from people. It's like, give me 5 kids and I'll like shape them into anything I want.
mm,
And it's like, then they go and do the experiment with like a kid. And it's like, just, it's like a rat in a lab, just
yeah,
like, just testing him, poking him, prodding him to like get him to exhibit certain behaviors. And it's
yeah,
like, dude, we do that to people? That's
yeah.
crazy.
Mm,
So, um, all that to say, so kind of taking that mechanistic approach. And for me, I've been kind of exposed to a new idea of what grace is.
mm,
And I think it's very much that second part of what you were saying, where it's like, you basically are receiving blessing in some way,
mm.
and things will change around you outside of just mechanistic causes. And so,
How are you
yeah,
defining mechanistic? What does that mean when you say
sure,
that?
sure, like auto or like cause and effect.
Okay.
So basically, almost Newtonian physics. It's like
Okay.
an action causes a reaction,
Okay.
and it's very like locked in and it's mathematical.
Okay. You're thinking
And
mechanism. Yeah. Like I pull the lever and
Mhm.
Kronk goes down to the alligators.
That's the third time I've heard this week.
Or it's not Kronk. Kronk pulls the lever and
Pull the lever, Kronk.
and
Yeah,
the other lady. Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Mechanistic.
yeah, exactly. So it's basically that everything is determined to
Okay.
some extent.
Okay.
There's no variability in the machine or the system.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think it's interesting because in this day and age, I think a lot of people live in that way, that like things are mechanistic,
Hmm.
or determined even. It's like people wouldn't say that. They would always say they have free will. But then when you look at all the science and all the, you know, even some of like the self-help type stuff, it's like, well, if you just, discipline yourself and do this and do that, then you're going to get, X result.
Hmm.
And so like people say they have free will, but no one really acts in that way
Hmm.
as far as what we tell people, or as far as how we order our lives in
Maybe
some
the
sense.
science doesn't even have free will. Maybe it's predetermined what we'll even study scientifically. I'm just trying to get meta on you.
Well, no, that's the thing. I think science, or a lot of scientific endeavors, pushed more towards lack of free will.
Mm.
By saying things are evolutionary or
Mm.
biologically driven, where it's
Mhm.
well, the neuron does this because it's programmed to do that, and it's going
Right.
to have this effect because it got this stimulus in
They
here.
didn't choose to do it that way. It was a thing in their brain that like made them do it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think most people would, if you ask them, they would say they have free will. But then, again, with the bigger corpus of science, and again, like just self-help type stuff, or just holding people the way we hold people accountable, it's all based on that they had free will to like choose each and every one of their actions.
Mhm.
um and so ultimately how this ties back into grace
Mm.
is that like grace is almost the way where you transcend a lot of those very causal relationships in some way. Like this outside force kind of takes something that was otherwise on rails in a sense, and then moves it on a new track,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, it's like the cause and effect was that you did X and therefore you deserve this punishment.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're going to take you off the like normal predetermined mechanism of the result of your actions.
Yeah.
And we're going to give you a new effect
Yeah.
for your actions.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
for me, I don't actually even see it as a punishment thing. Like, and that was something that I kind of learned from the Orthodox, because I always thought it was like, oh, you deserve this, but you got this, and that's grace. But I think, and especially with the Orthodox, it's more about, because it's, and here's a theory to blow everyone's minds that's evangelical. It's not substitutionary like Christ's death. And so it's not like, he didn't die for your sins.
Hmm.
And so there's the big heresy for the week.
Hmm.
but basically that it's not substitutionary. Like God didn't need to die like for your sins to like forgive you. It's like he can forgive sins without dying.
Like he forgave the sins of the dude who was lame. It was like, go, your sins are forgiven. And then we're like, how can he forgive sins? And he was like, well, since so you don't believe me, so I'll tell him to get up and walk because that's harder to do. And then he did the walking miracle, you know?
Yeah. So forgiving sins is easy, you know, but the sacrifice is about restoring like creation basically. And so,
and there's a lot of great symbolism in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
God's symbolic, so he's got to do a symbol.
Yeah.
He couldn't just be like, you're forgiven, but I didn't make a big deal about it.
Well, and that's the other thing. It's like you have to embody something to like things aren't just, it's like when people say the thought that counts, it's like, no, it doesn't. You know, it's like you need the thought and you need the action for it to count. And so it's, again, heaven and earth meeting. It's like you need both the spirit, the thought, and the manifestation of the earth and the idea to come together. And so it's like why Jesus didn't just go around saying he loved everybody and then like peaced out at the end. Right. You know, it's like you gotta live it out. And so what's the ultimate form of love but sacrifice? And so grace is like, you know, this power that like lets us participate in that reality of like of changing how things are going to be anyway. So I basically for me, do you have instances in your life where you felt like you were kind of locked into one way of doing things and then like this outside spiritual force kind of like intervened in some way and showed a different way or something like that?
Well, okay, I'm thinking of one that's very practical to all my single friends out there. To all the single people.
So me
on Valentine's Day who are trying to figure out what to do in the dating pool. I remember when I was single and trying to date people, and you'd go on a date, and if if the person, you felt like it went well, you know, it's like you're trying to gauge like, okay, I like them. Did they like me? I don't know, like I've got their phone number, but are they actually going to text me back after this? Maybe they'll just ghost me. I don't know, whatever. And it's like there was always kind of this feeling of success or not. And if it didn't feel like it went well, I would feel kind of crushed afterwards, you know, like, oh man, I blew it. I think I insulted somebody. Like one time, okay, I got to tell you this. I got to tell you about one time it went bad.
Nice.
One time I went out with this one gal. I don't remember what her name was. I went out with this gal, and I think we were at a coffee shop. We were getting coffee, and she was asking me about my work that I do and a bunch of details about work and stuff. And I made some comment. It was just rash and like over-exaggerated and unrealistic. And I was like, oh, I have my own opinions of neurology. You know, neurologists are always wrong. Those people don't know what they're talking about. And it was like, where did I even get this from? Like, why did I even say that? Like,
it's like anti-grace.
It's just like, it's just so, you know, exaggerated. So like, it's not even real. Like, come on. Yeah. And she was like, oh, my dad's a neurologist. I was like, wait, are you kidding me? And she was like, no, like for real. And it was in the first like 3 minutes of the sit down, you know, you just, sometimes you're like, oops, I blew it, you know?
Yeah.
But I think the change of track that I got on was that I would go on dates with people with the mindset of, I need to somehow win. I need to make this person like me. I need to like impress them. I need to show my best foot forward. I need this person to walk away from this being like, Brandon's amazing. He's just the best guy ever. I would be so lucky if I could go out with him. And then me being like, yeah, well, I don't know if I like you or not. You know, it's like I wanted to be this kind of like
the power to choose.
The power, you know, like and that's because I felt insecure. You know, it's like I felt like, oh, I don't know if they like me. Like I need them to like me, you know?
Yeah.
But eventually I made a shift, and I can't remember if I read a book or I can't remember where this thought came into my head, but there came a point when I said, you know what? when I go out with somebody new that I've never been out with before, I want to just go into the date with the mindset of, I'm just going to help this person feel good about their life. Let me just ask questions about them. I just want to make sure that they have a good time. Did I help them laugh? Did I help them enjoy themselves? I don't need to see them again. They don't have to like me at all. They don't have to nothing. I don't need to get anything out of this. I'm just going to go into the date with the idea of how can I like bless this person's life as much as possible.
Hmm.
And when I went into the date that way, it took away my insecurity. And I started having more fun. I felt like I had started getting better relationships with people. They were more interested in me. I didn't walk away from it feeling heartbroken or upset. And it totally took me to a whole different track. And I felt like that was a huge change of thinking in my dating, you know?
Hmm.
And I think that led to much healthier relationships, dating better people.
Yeah.
People would see me as a more valuable person. And if it didn't work out, you'd walk away from it and you didn't feel like you were like gypped or lost anything. It was like, well, I know I
Yeah.
blessed that person. Like, I hope they had a good rest of their life, you know?
Hmm.
I think that was just one that comes to mind, at least immediately, a big track change that
Yeah.
I would say maybe lines up with this idea of grace more.
Were you kind of praying for that to happen, or was that like, were you kind of like displeased with where you were at in that? Like,
I don't know if I was praying specifically to like try to change tracks like that exactly.
Mhm.
I think most of my prayers was just like, God, why am I still single and why does nobody seem to like me and why does it all hurt so much? I think that's more of what my prayers were like. More just like, I don't know how to date. How do I make this work, God?
Yeah.
And then that's kind of where I don't know, somehow that like epiphany came into my mind.
Yeah.
You know, at some point.
I think that, yeah, that's a good way of saying it, like epiphany,
Yeah.
where, you know, these things that it's like everything seems to hit at the right time, you know, where it's like, and it usually, in my experience, comes with kind of the humility stage of saying like, okay, I've exhausted all my avenues as far as like how I know to do things.
Mhm.
Like, okay, and not necessarily just saying I'm a failure, but that's part of it.
Yeah.
Where you're like, okay, I don't know how to do this. I'm gonna open myself up to a different way, and I think that's where grace kind of floods in a lot of times.
Yeah.
And so, and I think like you can ask for it too, and God's always ready to give it, and especially if you make yourself available. I think those epiphanies will come quite often, at least in my experience.
Yeah.
It's like I'm the only one blocking those epiphanies for the most part. And I've kind of heard it described basically. And again, this is something I kind of learned through the orthodoxy thing. It's like that think of like God's grace like the sun, right? It's always shining, and you know, or even think about the sun during the day, right? It's always shining, and like those rays that are coming down is grace, and so you're always able to kind of receive it. But then what happens if you go stand under a cloud or you go inside? You know, it's like the sun didn't stop shining, but you might have moved, or you know, the constructed things overhead that would have, you know, kind of blocked that out.
Yeah.
And so
And that's why winter is demonic.
less sun, less
Confirmed
grace.
it right there.
Yeah. So yeah, it's one of those things where I think the humility is key to kind of absorbing that and getting new epiphanies, new ways of doing things.
Well, what's
For
that
sure.
quote that's like, the pain, no, it's like the pain of the problem. No, people don't change until the pain of the problem is worse than the pain of change. So it's like the problem has to become so painful. You have to get humbled to this point of like, I don't know what to do anymore.
Yeah.
Before you're willing to do the actual solution that maybe you knew about before, but it was like, ooh, it's so uncomfortable to do that solution. I don't want to do that thing. And so you like blocked it out, you optioned out of that thing. And then when it became painful enough and you're like, I can't do this anymore, then you do that thing because it's less uncomfortable than the problem itself. And I think ideally it would be for people have the wisdom to choose the track that you know is going to fix the problem first before the problem becomes so bad that you like pick it out of desperation.
Yeah, I could almost see those being two different avenues, though, because it's like, in your situation with dating, it's like it's such a complicated thing. Like, how do
Mhm.
you know what the right thing is?
Right.
Like, there's no way to know, right?
Yeah.
And so you need some sort of, I don't know, either. And I mean, again, it could probably take multiple forms. I'm sure some people may, that maybe a mentor comes along, but even that could be an act of grace. It's like, how do you
Mhm.
know you're going to meet that mentor at the right time to like
Right.
teach you about dating or whatever,
Right.
It's like that could be that. But yeah, I mean, I do think, yeah, if you put off things that you need to do, that's the quickest route to depression.
Mhm.
For sure.
Yeah.
Speaking from firsthand experience.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it'll just like, yeah, you could be doing super great in life. And as soon as you put off like two or three things, it's like, man, that melancholy sets in so fast.
Mhm.
It's wild. Um, yeah, that's a pattern I've noticed in my own life.
Mhm.
And it's like, yeah. And then, but what's nice now is that I notice that melancholy, and then
Mhm.
that becomes the pain that is greater than the problem I want to fix most of the time.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's like, oh, okay, I will go do my boring training module for 2 hours and like, just get it done because it's gonna like it'll suck, but it won't suck as much as
Mm.
feeling like restless and
Yeah.
like I don't know what to do with my time. So,
Yeah.
um,
Totally.
yeah,
I got a question with grace.
yeah.
Is grace something that you show towards other people, or do you show it to yourself as well? Is it like always an others-centric concept? What do you think?
I should have looked up the actual definition of grace before this.
I mean, I don't know either.
I'm gonna show myself
just-
grace for not looking it up.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
No.
That's how it works.
Um,
I don't know. There's no right answer. We're just, theorizing or whatever.
yeah, I think in the context of how people use the word,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like it would apply to yourself and others.
Yeah.
Because if it's kind of like gentleness and forgiveness is how I think most people see that,
Yeah.
then yeah, I would say apply it to yourself as well.
Yeah. Like it makes sense that God wouldn't show himself grace because he doesn't need it. Would God show grace to himself? Maybe God the Father would show grace to Jesus the Son
Yeah.
as in human form on earth. Like that, I could see that
Yeah.
possibly happening. But I don't think God the Father would be like, I need a day to treat yourself. I don't think God the Father is like, I gotta have a little grace on myself. I don't know. Maybe he does. Maybe that's what the Sabbath. Maybe that's like his grace day to himself. I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, and that's a super interesting idea and I think that's why it has to be a triune God, because it's
Mhm.
like a lot of these aspects make sense in relation to others. So it's like even loving other people or love, it's like, can you have love if you don't have multiple aspects of a person,
Mm.
And it's like even the idea of like self-love is kind of weird
Mm.
in the human context.
Yeah.
It's like, what are you loving, It's like,
Yeah.
are you loving your body? Are you, people, and it just shows like how much that cognitive disconnect between people and their bodies even is, because it's
Mm.
like, it's like people notice the separation between their mind, their body, and their like spirit in some sense.
Mhm.
People can kind of be like, if you're, yeah, I don't know. It's just there's some sort of separation there where it's like if you're loving yourself, it's like your inner self is loving your physical form a lot of times,
Mm.
or people will do. And that's usually the form it takes, right? People don't really like just be like, I'm gonna spend a day loving myself, and then they go like meditate or something, Like that doesn't really happen as much. It's usually an excuse to get a massage or do something physical,
Yeah,
like,
it's usually something of the flesh.
yeah,
It's not always like something of the spirit.
yeah,
So
They're
it's-
not like, I'm gonna go love myself. Okay, I prayed all day,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whatever. So
That's true. Yeah, love yourself is like so synonymous with kind of I'm gonna just relax and do whatever feels good and do whatever I want to do. It's
Yeah.
not like I'm gonna do the healthy, good things that maybe take a little discipline but are gonna restore me. It's like
Yeah.
I'm gonna just sort of let go. And like
Yeah.
abandon the discipline almost.
Yeah, and when we talk about them, but then it's funny because then when we talk about loving other people, it's like, I've, I've heard this a bit where, you give them tough love, where
Hmm.
it's like, you're not going and giving, I mean, obviously going and getting someone else a massage or, doing something nice for them is loving as well. But, the idea of like, well, I'm gonna like I'm not gonna let him walk all over me. I'm gonna have boundaries, and I'm gonna love him by telling him the hard truth or something,
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like you're willing to be a little bit harder on other people when you're loving them, but when
Mm-hmm.
you're loving yourself, you're like not gonna be hard on yourself. It's like that's
Mm-hmm.
not self love to like tell myself not to eat that ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
That's like self deprivation. That's bad.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
whereas like
That's right.
if you treated other people or treated yourself like you treated other people, you would kind of give yourself that tough love from time to time, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Mm.
uh, but yeah, talking
Mm.
about Jesus and symbolism. I'm
Mm.
just gonna totally derail from grace for a
Go
second,
for it.
and there's like so I've been watching a bunch on the Shroud of Turin,
Oh yeah, yeah. You told me that. Yeah.
and this will be my way to sneak it in.
Oh, okay.
But
I'll give you grace on that.
thank you, I needed it. But basically, the idea of like a crown of thorns
Mm.
is like symbolic in a lot of different ways, and the idea is so thorns and thistles are associated with sin, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like after the curse in the garden,
Mm-hmm.
it was like thorns and thistles grew,
Mm-hmm.
and so the idea being there's like a couple different connections through the Bible, but so like they were kind of thinking about like what the crown would be of thorns, and everyone thinks of like a little circlet or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing is like the priests would actually be like crowned in the temples. They would wear
Hmm.
crowns.
Hmm.
And their crowns were like full caps basically
Hmm.
that they would wear. And so then when they would do like the scapegoat stuff and whatever, they would like lay their hands on the head of the goat.
Hmm.
And so there's like this whole idea of like head being like where things are, where like the power is and the horns and all this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, so they were like thinking what a crown might look like, and it was more of like a cap of thorns, which was kind of interesting. So the fact that even Jesus kind of takes on the earliest notions of sin and wears it on his head as a crown, is like cool. And yeah, basically the idea is that even in Genesis, like they weren't talking about like thorns and thistles in the ground, like physical ones, like that it was more like that sin will enter the world and like corruption and chaos will enter the world. And I mean, like obviously the physical is a manifestation of that, but it was more of like a spiritual truth of being like now the thorns and the thistles will like, sprout. And so more about talking about the hearts and attitudes of men. And so obviously like Jesus is taking that all on as the scapegoat, wearing thorns on the head. But the other interesting thing is like when you see the story of Jacob or Abraham and Jacob, right? They go up the mountain. Yeah, those two.
Abraham and his son Isaac.
Yeah, thank you. It's my middle name. I should know that.
I was like,
it's like skipping one.
yeah. Honestly, I feel bad for Isaac because Abraham is a big character. Jacob is a big character. And it's like, what did Isaac do? Well, he married Rachel. And then he like went blind and his son lied to him. And like he doesn't have any like real significant stories that are just like his like isolated stories.
Yeah.
He kind of just was the in-between dude.
Well, this is where the mountain story I think is his story in some sense.
Yeah.
Because the idea, and it's like in a lot of kind of rabbinic traditions as well, is that like he was like around 30 at the time. So it wasn't like he was some like little 7-year-old kid that they're like
he was 33.
Yeah, somewhere around there. But yeah, so the idea is that he's older because I forget how they come to that exactly, but the idea being that like,
well, he was carrying the wood.
Yeah,
I think he's got to have some muscle on him.
That's true, yeah. And so when he's carrying the wood, the interesting thing is Jesus carries the beam of the cross, you know,
Oh,
on
yeah,
his
yeah.
back.
Yeah,
And so they're
yeah.
both carrying wood up a mountain
Totally.
or up a hill. And
And I think
yeah, go ahead.
the actual location is similar too.
I've heard that. Yeah.
I don't know that for sure, but I've heard that maybe it was in the same
Yeah.
range of mountains or hills or bedrock or something
Yeah.
similar. Yeah.
I've heard connections. I don't know exactly what they are, but yeah. So the idea being that like when Jesus carried the cross, it wasn't actually even a full cross like people always depict, because that would have weighed like 300 pounds or something like that. And it's actually like all the posts were already like set in place, and they would just carry the cross beam on their shoulder.
Oh, yeah, that makes more sense.
And then they would nail him to that and then lift him up onto the post.
Oh.
And so, yeah. So basically, yeah, you get this idea of, you know, a young man carrying up wood up a mountain for a sacrifice. And it's like, oh, suspicious.
Yeah.
And the idea being, you know, that he was a willing sacrifice too, because it's like if he's some 30-year-old or whatever, and Abraham's got to be like at that point, you know, 120 or something. It's like, you're not going to like bind him if he doesn't want to be bound, you know? Like,
Yeah.
like he's just going to throw you off the mountain.
Be like, gotcha, son.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't pull a fast one on your old pops here.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, don't break a bone. You have osteoporosis.
Right. So yeah, the idea being, you know, that in at least rabbinic traditions, and I think the Orthodox kind of believe that too, where it's like he was an older person. But you know, and so then when you get to the idea of God providing with the ram, it's like what happens with the ram? His horn is stuck in thickets.
Oh, his power.
Yeah.
Stuck in the curse.
So it's like the head again is in the thorns and like the brambles and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's just like it's like a total foreshadowing of Jesus with the crown of thorns in some way.
Totally.
You know, but he's not the ram, then he becomes the lamb instead, you know, or yeah. So yeah, I don't know. There's just like weird symbolism of thorns throughout the whole Bible. And I don't know how I can tie that back to grace.
Well,
but
because if it wasn't grace, God could have been like, well, I gave you the son.
That's true.
Now you got to kill him for me.
That's true.
And that's what I'm telling you to do. So you need to obey it, Abraham. And it could have just been like, that's the deal. Okay?
Yeah.
Or he could have even been like, well, he gets to stay alive and, you know, that's it. But instead he did a whole different track.
Yeah.
Of being like, he stays alive and I give you
a blessing. That's true.
Ram.
Yeah.
You get I provided the sacrifice like you believed in me.
That is grace.
You know?
Yeah.
So there's some grace.
Yeah. And that's true. I guess if you follow, you know, the arc of the whole Bible, there's going to be grace after grace after grace. And
yeah. Especially when you consider how much Israel totally biffs it over and over again.
Well, see, that's the thing. I don't think grace is necessarily tied up with like failure. Like it's something that's independent of failure. Like
I agree that it could be independent of failure, but it still I think is something undeserved. You know, like it's like I don't think people earn grace.
Yeah, totally.
And so even if the nation of Israel wasn't making mistakes.
So maybe failures accentuates grace. Like, if that makes sense. Like, the more failures you have when you do receive grace, it makes it that much more stand out.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so
the grace intensity level goes up.
Yeah.
When you fail more.
Yeah. So maybe that's why we highlight failure in contrast to grace so often.
Yeah.
It's because it makes the grace stand out, that it's like, oh man, they messed up so much, and then God still was like kind and like imparted, you know, blessing upon them.
Yeah.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
If, you know, father has a little kid and little kid is like, I stole from the cookie jar. It's like, well, don't do that again, but I'll still take you to Disneyland. But if the little kid's like, I crashed your car and drove it off a cliff, it's going to be a lot of grace to be like, I'll still take you to Disneyland. Don't know how because my car's ruined now, but I'm still going to take you. It's like,
yeah. That's true. Yeah, it kind of highlights the amount of love that person has for that.
It's like, this grace is a lot harder right now. Really don't want to do this.
Right. Yeah. When we get like into weird ideas of where it's like, or at least I do, where it's like, well, you don't want to reinforce crashing the car, you know?
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like, we're going to withhold something because we're afraid of promoting, bad stuff. And
Yeah.
then for me, again, it's like I think of that like with God. I'm like, well, why would God bless me after I do something bad? Because it's like, isn't that just going to reinforce the bad behavior?
That's the whole point of Romans 6, right? Where
Is
grace
it?
abounds. No, where sin abounds, grace abounds,
Hmm.
right? That was the whole thing where they were like, well, if God just forgives us, let's just do whatever the heck we want.
Yeah.
And then that's when the Apostle Paul was like, no, may it never be. Like, don't go down that route. Like,
Yeah.
that's just going to take you away from God, and that's not what you want to do at the end of the day. Like, don't do that, people.
Yeah. But in some way, grace doesn't reinforce sin. I don't know. Like, I mean, I've experienced it to some extent where it's like, there is grace that saves you from further sin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like super cool when that happens, and it's like, because I think when you recognize it, if you can recognize the grace, then that has like a healing effect on sin and like whatever selfish and prideful ways.
Yeah.
So, but it takes, again, being like humble, I think, to really just be paying attention to that. And you got to be attentive.
Yeah.
So
I think because like sin has to have some kind of reward pathway to it, or else people don't want to do it, right? There's a reward pathway, but then after the reward, there's like
meeting
regret.
some need maybe.
Yeah, meeting a need. There's something that's like, I did this sin. Ooh, it felt good, and it's like, something in the brain just felt yummy because I did the thing. But then long term, you have regrets. You wish you didn't did that. You have moral right buyer's remorse, all that kind of thing.
Nice.
And I think grace is different, where it has a reward pathway that doesn't go away. You got the reward. Ooh, man, it was so great to like feel the presence of God and feel the affirmation of the Lord and the Spirit of God. And there was some grace, but it's not like a month later you're like, oh, wish I hadn't have prayed to God that day. That sucks.
Right?
It's like,
yeah.
like you don't
it's
come
not
back
hollow.
you don't come back to grace like with regret,
It's like the reward that's full instead of hollow. That's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll leave it on that.
It's like grace is like a peanut M&M. There's a peanut inside compared to the normal M&Ms where there's just nothing.
Wasn't the
was
first
just
M&M
chocolate.
a peanut M&M?
Was it?
I think so.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, chocolate was a later addition.
Yeah, peanut M&M's the only way to go.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. Glad we figured that out.
Yeah. Now that we fixed that problem,
let's fix Brandon's problem.
I'm inspired by peanut M&M's.
I hope not, because I'm about to ruin your day.
I'm not.
Red 42.
I actually was just watching about how, I didn't know this, but like Skittles are banned in parts of Europe because they have like chemical dyes or whatever. And I think I was watching something about how Skittles are going to be banned in California in like 2027 because of the chemicals. And they finally said, nope, we're going to ban you and you have to change all your recipes to be healthy. So by 2027, they're supposed to like have removed a certain list of different ingredients and all these things. And so they have until then to like change their recipes or whatever.
But until 2027, they're going to be selling them.
They're going to be selling them in Nevada, and you're going to have, contraband, smuggled Skittles. You can't buy these anymore.
Dude,
this is the good stuff.
I just love how they're like, they literally have to put a ban on it because it's like toxic.
Yeah.
And then they're like, but you can still sell it for 5 more years. We know it's toxic, but you can sell it for 5 more years until it's banned.
Yeah, it's like you don't, because if you shut it down right now, they're going to go out of business. Or, maybe they wouldn't go out of business, but they'll lose a lot of money or whatever, It's
Sure.
like you screw over this company. And it's like, just, yeah, I mean, I don't care. But like, if you're a politician, I guess you care. But, it's like you got to give them the fair chance to, okay, like make it right, like change the recipe, something healthy or whatever. I don't. It's like if you're banning Skittles because they're unhealthy, like what the heck with alcohol and smoking and But
yeah.
Anyway, that's a whole rabbit hole that I'm going down.
It's fair.
Yeah, what's inspiring to me aside from ranting about Skittles? So, I've got a question for you. Okay.
Okay.
What kind of communication? What's the form of communication that you use the most?
Dio logos. No, I don't know.
Like-
Is that spoken word?
I don't even know what
Yeah.
that is.
Uh,
Dio logos?
Yeah, I
Is
think
that like
it's
Spanish for the Bible?
no, I think it's spoken word.
Spoken word? Okay.
Or maybe dialogue or something. I don't know.
Okay, so like verbal communication.
It's like Socrates dialogue, I think.
Socrates.
Maybe not. I don't know.
I don't know.
I should stop by my head.
All right, that's fine.
What kind of communication do I use the
What
most?
kind of communication do you use the most?
Is it the one I think I use the most? Or the
Yeah,
one I
sure. The
actually use
one that you think you use the most.
Okay.
You know? Like talking on the phone, texting, writing a letter to somebody, sign language,
Yeah.
speaking,
art, body language.
just staring, pensive stares back and forth.
Because I think the correct answer is probably body language. You probably spend the most time
Okay.
communicating
Yeah.
that way.
I didn't think about that, but yep, that probably is
It's more like subtle though,
communicating.
telepathically.
Mhm.
And just communicating with people specifically, or just in general?
Just in general, just any form of communication, animals,
Carrier
to,
pigeons.
to yourself in the mirror,
I mean, probably text then.
emails. Okay, text. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a common one that a lot of people use, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now, today, in today's world, it's amazing because we can communicate with somebody like anywhere on the planet, right? You can just long distance communication, which is wild, right? So, and it's instant and all these things, right? It's so crazy. But there was an ancient form of communication that people have been able to use for as long as humans have been alive.
Is it the pyramids?
No. But maybe I'll talk about that someday. 'Cause that would be cool.
Yeah.
It's not down that rabbit hole.
Oh, okay,
It's not-
okay, good.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah.
I got some people I can call if we need to.
It's not down that track.
Okay.
But no, there's an ancient form of communication that humanity has used for as long as we've been alive that is a completely different form of communication that is also long distance that I think is fascinating. Do you have any guesses of what it might be?
Smoke signals or light?
I didn't think of those, but no, not those.
Okay. Sound and horns?
Oh, those are good ones, but I wasn't thinking of those either. It's super long distance. It's the longest distance there possibly is.
Architecture according to constellations?
That's a good one. Yeah. I was gonna say prayer.
Oh, okay.
Right? I know. I didn't allude that it could be outside the
That's
physical
fair.
world.
Right.
But it's the idea that you pray as like a form.
Okay, I get it.
Longest distance, right? Yeah, I know. Or maybe really close distance. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's like a whole world apart. But prayer, it's like when I think about all the forms that humans are communicating with each other all the time, there's also this like other weird form of communication where you're not communicating with like other people, but now you're communicating with God. And it's this like almost telepathic sort of thing. It's like such a weird form of communication. It's like, am I just feeling prayer? Am I thinking it?
Yeah.
Do I have to articulate words?
Yeah.
Could I write it down? Does that still count? Like, it's such a weird form of communication. It's unlike any other communicatory, signals that we send with people.
Well, it's almost like a super form of communication because it encapsulates all those other types.
Yeah. And I think it's just interesting because it's also the concept that, you, the inferior being, have access to communicate with the superior being. I mean,
The mothership.
The mothership. You just think about how often can that occur. Like, I can't even communicate with the president of the United States. I can't just be like, here's my phone number. Let me send you an email. Like, that's a very difficult communication, you know?
Mhm.
Like, we hear from the president on TV and the news and stuff
Yeah,
all
it's a
the time.
one-way
It's a
communication.
one-way thing, but we don't really like text back and are like, hey, just thought you shouldn't pass that one policy, you know, just
Yeah.
FYI. You know, it's like we don't really have that kind of communication. It's even hard to communicate sometimes with like your boss can be difficult, or not only getting a hold of them, but just like having them take you seriously, or, you know, there's all kinds of forms of communication that it's like, this is very difficult to do this
Mhm.
communication. And on top of that, there's all the miscommunication. There's all the like, well, you sent a text, and oh, it was the auto text that auto spelled, and that wasn't the word I tried to say. And, you know, I mean, there's so easy to communicate wrong. And it just seems fascinating to me that we have this like prayer communication system
Mhm.
where we can like pray to God from like the lowest being to like the highest being. Well, maybe we're not the lowest. I mean, ants are pretty low. Dogs are pretty low. It's an insult in the Bible to call someone a dog. You know, it's like I wouldn't even call anyone a dog. You know, anyway. But you know, we're lower beings than God, and He's the highest being, and we can just pray to Him.
Mhm.
You know, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific channel. Like, what if God was like, if you want to pray, you have to go to the tallest mountain around, and you have to like do all of these rituals, and then you can only pray if you write it down on the special parchment
On the second Tuesday of each month.
on the second Tuesday of the month, and you have to be
and
totally
then I'll get
sinless.
back to you in a week.
Yeah, and you have to give it to the carrier pigeon, flies it up to outer space. I don't know, and then you have to wait there, and I'll send you a reply.
Yeah.
And it'll only ever be a one-word reply. I don't know. It's like, I'll speak to you out of the fire. I mean, that's like, what if
Yeah.
that was how we prayed? You know, I mean, how wild would that be? But
It'd probably be normal.
maybe people would just, yeah, that would be the normal. You know, that
Yeah.
would be like, oh, that's how it's done.
Yeah.
You know, but I just think of how prayer is so easy to do. Anytime, any form of communication, God's there. You have access. You know, like He reads your thoughts and your intentions of your heart. Like, maybe if you kind of you'd send a typo, like He still gets it. You know, like you're probably not going to miscommunicate as much. That just seems to me like an insane superpower,
Mm.
and I think that's inspiring.
Yeah.
I look at prayer and it's like, what the heck? How do we have this? Like, who gets this? You know, like who
Yeah.
gets power to just like, hey God, here's the thing. I want
Yeah.
to talk to you about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I got about 1,000 questions.
Go ahead.
So,
Yes, first question.
yeah, no, I think it is super interesting having that link, you know, in some sense, where, yeah, you definitely. I like how you put it with like, you know, you wouldn't have access to the president or whatever. You know, it's like, it's so true. It's, you know, everything in our society is very much shaped, you know, pyramidally.
Mhm.
I want to say hierarchically, but I don't want to be Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, you can't say hierarchy without just emanating Jordan Peterson these days. He's ruined that word.
Yeah.
Nobody else is allowed to say it.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, you know, it's like because the, you know, the people at the top don't have infinite capacity.
Right.
It's like they can't communicate back down to like the masses in that way. And so they're just like naturally insulated from the many voices of the people below them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it is. I don't know. I guess the first thing I'll touch on is the miscommunication part, because I'm always curious about that. Where, like, because like, yeah, okay, like you said, God knows what your thoughts are. He knows your intention and stuff like that. And then, but it's almost like, to me, it seems like the miscommunication almost comes from within, where it's like, you don't know what you're saying when you're like, you know, praying or speaking. And so it's like God might understand you perfectly, but you're like still miscommunicating. Do you feel like if that makes sense?
Yeah, it is. Well, okay, wait. So that's a good question. Yeah, because on the miscommunication part, there is a lot of detail you can get into with that, you know, and I don't want to miscommunicate here, so we got to be clear.
Let's hash it out.
Like, I don't think that God is a lawyer where he's just like, well, you only asked me to bless them. You didn't tell me when or where to bless them. So I'm disinclined to acquiesce to your request, And like, I don't think God is, looking too technically on certain things, just, oh, God, please bless my so-and-so today as they're having their surgery, like, well, I'm only going to bless them for 3 hours. That was a 3-hour blessing, like,
There's a great movie you should watch called Bewitched, and with Brendan Fraser.
Oh, yeah.
And
Maybe I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's basically he makes like a deal with the devil, and he makes multiple deals with the devil, and so he's like, I just want to be rich, and so then he's like, the whatever devil or witch makes him he's like super rich, but he's a drug dealer. So like all these people are after him and stuff. He's like, oh no, I didn't want to be rich actually. This sucks. I'm like being shot at and stressed and getting chased. He's like, you know what? Riches isn't everything. I just want to be in love. And so he like wakes up the next morning. He's like next to a dude he's married to. And he's like, no. He's like, I don't want this either. He's like, I don't want that.
Oh man.
So it's like each time he has to get
This is an older movie.
Yeah. Each time he has to be like more and more specific, but it still goes wrong, because he's just
That's
like,
so funny.
Yeah.
That's funny.
So, but yeah.
Yeah, so like I don't think that God is a lawyer with certain things. Like I think that if you pray for something and it might be slightly ambiguous, but I think that it's still an effective prayer. Now, on the other side of that, I do think that you could err on the side of being like not specific, and maybe this is to your point, what you're saying, maybe you don't even know what you want, where there could be a situation where you're like, I don't know how to make a decision in this situation, and so I don't even really know what to pray. Like, I don't even really know. Should it be option A or option B? Give me wisdom.
Yeah.
Help me make the right choice. I don't know what the right choice
or like
is.
prayers of like, just God make me rich.
Yeah,
It's
God.
like, you don't know what you need,
Just
you
do,
need or want.
yeah, God, just do this thing, and I think it's the right thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's, well, let me say this. I think that sometimes you don't know what the right option is, and you are confused, and so you don't know what to pray for. And I think that's a perfect opportunity to pray, because I think that that's a great time to be humble and transparent before God, and I think God wants you to seek him in those times.
Yeah, 1,000%.
But when there's the other option, like what you're talking about, when you think you know what you want and you're praying for something, and it was like, this is not, like God tells you to seek wisdom and how wisdom is better than riches, and you're like, I don't care about wisdom, give me the riches, God. Like when you're praying something that's like, I don't think God really honors that prayer. I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I think that's then where, you pray something and it's not even that it's a miscommunication. Like I think God understands what your prayer is, but I think that's where people, they may not get the prayer answered per se, or people might feel disappointed with God or upset, and it's like, well, hold on. You went to this place. You went to, step 2, asking God for stuff you wanted, and you didn't really even go back to step 1 of like, what does God actually honor in people that God wants his people to seek these things. If God says you should seek wisdom and meditate on the word of the Lord day and night, and if you pray along those lines, like, God, help me to meditate on your word, and God, help me to be wise, and things like that, it's like, yeah, I think God's going to honor those prayers.
Yeah.
But then if you're like, no, God, just make me rich, whatever it is, it's like, I don't know if God's going to honor that. It's like,
Yeah.
Is that something that God wants for people just in general? Like, not necessarily, Yeah.
All right, here's a slightly different question, but
Okay.
So in the Old Testament, you kind of get the idea of like the Spirit being in us in the New Testament, right? And like this kind of link being established in some sense, and like sharing with the presence of God. In the Old Testament, it's like the Spirit of God would like come down upon certain people. Do you think everybody had that, like, and you would do certain offerings and stuff like that, and the prayers would ascend in the smoke and all this kind of stuff? Do you think everybody had that like personal connection and was able to like pray to God and hear from him in the Old Testament, or like prior to that?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know because, like, there's some instances where it seems as though people were praying, and maybe it wasn't in the temple with the incense and an offering, and it seemed.
Well, more so like
Oh,
I think everyone could pray to God,
okay, yeah.
but like we were talking with like the multi-directional thing where it's like you get to pray to God and then he gets to like respond to you,
Oh,
you know,
okay.
type thing. Do you-
God's response.
yeah, you know, where it's like that open channel going both ways.
Mm,
Like I think for sure people could send prayers up in the Old Testament.
Okay, yeah.
But do you think it was like a omnidirectional
Oh,
exchange?
no, I don't think God spoke to everybody. I don't think God speaks to everybody now. I think even now people think that God speaks to them, but I don't feel like I don't think
Putting
God
them on
speaks to people.
blast.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I would even argue that maybe God doesn't speak to people now nearly as much as he did back then. And I don't even think God spoke to people a whole lot back then, because I think that God said a lot of what he needs to say to humanity in his word in the Bible. And so I'm a bit more of a cessationalist in that way, where I think that, or is it cessationalist or sensationalist? I can't remember the exact one terminology, but I don't think that there's as much enacting of the gifts of like prophecy or tongues or things like that as people might think. Because I think that those things are very, very minimalized in the New Testament, because I don't think there's as much inspiration of what God wants. Like people ask God, oh, what should I do in my life? Give me a divine word. But I feel like God's already given his divine word, and most of what you need to do, like 99% of what you should be doing in your life, is probably given in the Bible, like the big chunks of how you should live your life.
Interesting.
I think it comes down to maybe smaller details where maybe God will give you an answer, or maybe he'll just give you like the wisdom to make the decision yourself. Maybe he's not even going to like give you, maybe he won't stir a feeling or like speak a word into your mind or anything. Maybe he's just going to educate you indirectly. Oh, you learned something new about the situation and it changed your mind. Like, oh, God just gave you the wisdom to make a better decision, whatever it is.
Interesting.
I don't think that God always speaks to people as much as they think. I don't really believe that.
Interesting. Yeah, because
so,
I'm going on almost 100% now.
Yeah, no, I know that you lean that way. I think
Yeah.
my dad leans that way. I used to lean that way when I was younger, and I've swung the pendulum pretty far the other way. I don't really think that God speaks to people as much as they think he does.
What changed for you in that opinion?
What changed for me? Well, I read a book.
Oh no.
And I joined a cult. No. What was the name of the book? I'm trying to remember. Decision Making in the Will of God by, I can't remember what his name is. I'd have to look it up. And it basically talks about how do you know if God is speaking to you, and what are the examples in the Bible of how God spoke to people, why he spoke to people, and then what are the examples of kind of how modern day people are trying to interpret God. And it's very, very different. Like God would do a supernatural thing in the Bible, and then he would speak to people for a very specific reason that was usually changing the course of like the nation of Israel, or a very significant event that was happening, or like he was giving scripture to somebody to write down, so it would be for all, everybody to read in the future of human history. There wasn't a whole lot of like, I'm going to tell you which color shirt to wear today so that when you just so happen to be at the market, like this thing can happen, Maybe
Your future spouse will like it.
Your future spouse will like it and see you. Like maybe God gives people those inclinations, and I've heard wild stories of somebody was like, God, if you're real, I want somebody to walk through that door right now with a blue shirt. And then somebody walks through, and that person who walked through was like, I just felt like God told me to wear a blue shirt today. And it's like, maybe that was God. Like maybe that was real or whatever. Or maybe people just kind of like superimposed weird feelings and like thought that it was God. Maybe, what if somebody walked through the door with a blue shirt and they were like a Muslim instead? And it's like, okay, what if, oops, like that wasn't what I was
dating.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. I feel like almost any religion has supernatural stories of like coincidence that they think was God. And I don't think that it's.
I mean, you could say about most of the Christian story.
I don't think so. I don't think
Really?
you can. No. You can't say that when it comes to like the prophecies about Jesus. Those aren't coincidence. There's
Well,
too many.
what makes the difference between? Oh, so it's
They're
the number of
like
coincidences.
it's not, because coincidence is something that could, like, there's a probability that could happen.
Okay.
Like coincidence is like, oh, there's plenty of people who wear blue shirts. Like, it's not really that random or
Yeah, but it's
unsuspecting that
still a
like somebody could.
coincidence.
Oh well, yeah,
Like,
it's a coincidence, but I would say it's a more likely coincidence.
sure.
Whereas something like, you look at prophecies from the Old Testament of who Jesus was, like this, the statistical possibility of there being a person like Jesus matching the prophecies about him is just so unlikely. It's to the point of almost being impossible. So I don't think you could look at Jesus and say, well, anybody could have met all of these prophecies. Like, it's just coincidence. Like, I think that's an unrealistic
I think it
scenario.
just matters on your level of, I guess, tolerance. Is that the right word?
Like
Whereas-
acceptable probability. Or,
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah.
you just have to reach a certain threshold, and then it's
Like, look at the example of Gideon. Okay, so he was feeling a little insecure about what. So first of all, God had already told him what he needed to do. He didn't ask for the fleece sign because he didn't know. He knew, he was just scared and wanted to like double check God's will. So he says, okay, make the dew wet and the fleece dry. And then he's like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Hold on, do the opposite, God. And then he says, so I mean, he literally asks for a sign and then the reversal of that sign. I mean, that's a more supernatural kind of occurrence, like that wouldn't make sense if you said, oh, I want the fleece to be, wet and the ground to be dry. And then if you take that as your sign, you're just like, okay, that's good. Like, could have been coincidence that maybe the dew of the morning dried off of the ground but stayed in the fleece and the fleece soaked it up, and like, okay, maybe that would have happened any old day if I threw a fleece outside. But then to reverse it and be like, oh, wait, I want the fleece to be dry and the ground to be wet with dew. Now that kind of confirms that, like, okay, it's very unlikely that a normal weather pattern would have just reversed that scenario. Like, that seems more supernatural, So once he saw that more supernatural sign, that convinced him it was God's will,
Well, you said he knew, but he was scared, and so
Yeah.
like, was he scared because he was doubting, or was he scared because
I
it's
think
like such a big task?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was lacking confidence, and I think he needed some extra confirmation that, like, okay, I need to just double check that, like, I think that's like a doubt. I think that's lack of faith. Like, if he had more faith in God, I think that he wouldn't have had as much doubt. He would have been willing to say, okay, God, this is what God told me to do. And like, if I believe that this really was from God who told me to do this thing this time, then I don't need this like extra confirmation.
Sure.
I think he needed the extra confirmation because he maybe lacked the faith in God.
Yeah, because I think there's like a two-parter to that almost, where you can lack the confirmation that God's even speaking to you, or you can lack confirmation on the follow through of what's spoken to you.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think when you get to that first part, it's like, oh, did God even speak to me? And then even if you pass that hurdle, then there's a whole hurdle of, okay, I heard God say this or whatever. And then like, is the outcome going to be, okay? Or like, what's the outcome going to be? Is it, something I want to even sign up for? And so, yeah, it is interesting to see like what he was potentially testing there,
Yeah.
It's like, is he more worried about the armies, or that he actually like heard God correctly?
Yeah. Yeah. Could
So,
be. Right.
Yeah. Interesting.
So, I mean, that's a long, rabbit hole on more of the listening, the receiving from God. And that's, I'm happy to dialogue about some of those aspects, but I do think it's fascinating how we can always pray to God, and however he responds, whether he gives us what you're asking for, maybe you're not even asking for something. Maybe you're just thanking him, you're speaking to him. I think just that communication ability is amazing to have,
So it's not really communicating though, if God's not speaking back to you, right?
Yeah, because communication doesn't have to be both ways. communication can be just
Yeah.
one
Okay.
way.
I'm thinking dialogue, I guess.
It would be, it would be like conversing would be two ways.
So you're like sending letters to God, essentially.
Yeah, like you're sending letters,
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't think that, I don't like when I see, and I don't know, I haven't done like a deep dive in the word studies of prayer in the Bible. I don't know. I could look up those words and look at definitions and see how they're used and things.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see prayer as something that requires God to speak back. It seems like it's just from the one person to the other person sending the message. And I think that just that act alone is miraculous. Just that act of person A communicate with God. You say something to God and God heard you.
Mm-hmm.
And if he decides to act on it or respond to you in some way, speak back, you ask for something and he does it, whatever it is, that seems absolutely miraculous.
Yeah. Big time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Transcending time and space.
Yeah. Yeah. Transcending time and space.
Yeah. It just, yeah, it is pretty fascinating. And it's interesting with the, again, like how open-ended it can seem, it's like, well, is it a thought? Is it a word? Is it a whatever? Like it's funny because like when you grow up in the church, you have all these ideas of like what prayer is and you get like kind of ingrained with that culture. But then like watching people like come to the faith, it's like, what is prayer? Like trying to explain it to people. And you're like, well, I don't know. You kind of just do it. And like, well, how? And it's for the Orthodox, it's kind of interesting because they have a lot of like pre-written prayers. And so they, there's like a whole prayer. I got one around here somewhere, but there's like a whole prayer book, and it's like when you're, so like be like a prayer for travel, a prayer for like finding a spouse, a prayer for,
I didn't know about that prayer.
Yeah, they got them all. It's like a prayer if you're about to make a business deal or whatever, a prayer if you're need, a confession prayer, like all these different things. And like in the catechism class I'm doing, it's like a lot of the people are like, well, this seems so like rote and, like so just mechanical. And I don't, it's like, where's the, like, why am I not just spitballing and saying whatever I feel, And they're like, basically, well, and then that's also tied in with the prayers in the service, which are like pretty much the same every week, so it's like, people are like, well, where's the spontaneity in it? And where's like the dynamism, I don't know, like
sincerity?
No, well, dynamism. Is that how you say it?
I'm not sure what that word is.
Dynamic? I don't know. Basically, it's dynamic, but
dynamic.
But you say it with the ism.
Dynamism.
Yeah.
Dynamicism. The catechism of the
dynamism.
Dynamic
I don't know.
Catechism.
Yeah. Anyway, too many words for me.
Too many isms.
Yeah. And so it's like, it's lacking kind of this this free form or whatever of prayer during the service, and it's like, well, the idea there is that you're all participating in the same prayers, and then like it's actually doing more than just, not only is it affecting the world in some way, in a spiritual way, but it's also kind of binding you together with the other people in that thing. So not everybody's off in their own little corner praying for this and that and the other thing.
Right.
It's like they don't discourage those prayers at all, and they say, actually increase those prayers, outside of these times of us praying together. So it's like there's different prayers for different times.
Yeah.
And so like, during service, it is about bonding with your like fellow Christians and like, sharing your attention on one thing, God and reverencing and worshiping God. And so when you do that, it's like you just naturally can't be all over the place, if you want to come together as a single body and a single unit,
Yeah.
So so it is interesting. And then the prayers, and like the books and stuff are to teach people how to pray, and so it's like, it's basically anything you do over and over again from like a basic source becomes ingrained in you essentially. So it's like when you learn a new skill, what do? It's like you follow the templates first. It's like when you're becoming an artist, right? You like learn life drawing first, and you know, start sketching things, and then you follow tutorials, and then you do all this stuff, and then by the end it's like you're painting your own stuff, and you're like
Mm.
coloring outside the lines, and you're adding this and that and freestyling, and same with
Yeah.
music or whatever,
Yeah.
or learning a language. It's like you got to learn the fundamentals first.
It's an interesting point because, I think we, especially in American culture, I think we make prayer theatrical or dramatized,
Yeah.
Oh, Lord, Holy Blessed Father.
Yeah, you gotta make it exciting. Everything has to be exciting.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because I think people actually get burnt out with that.
Yeah.
Because you can only muster so much passion until it's like, okay, this is my 5th super passionate prayer today. Like,
Run out of energy here.
just want to eat the dinner, it's like whatever. And it's just interesting how I think that can actually lead to a lot of people getting sort of exhausted from praying and maybe even not wanting to pray, because it just seems like it's like you almost lose sincerity because you make sincerity like too much, or you overdo it, or I don't even know how to explain that, but
Sure.
I feel like I see that. I feel like I see that in pastors a lot, where I can tell that they're like trying to muster this sincere prayer for the sake of the people, but this is like the 20th prayer meeting they've had to go do that day, where it's like every single thing you do with people has to be opened and closed with prayer. So they're saying all of these sort of like,
and you're just like piecing together these different parts, like into it's like the same phrases you used all the time, just pieced together in like a slightly different way each time.
I've had to like repeat these sort of like chanting things. Whereas like if you just accept the fact that like, I'm not really passionate about this right now, but this is just sort of like the gateway prayer I have to pray for us to start this meeting and end this meeting. And so I'm not going to try to make it passionate. I'm just going to like say this is the begin the meeting prayer. Like we're doing this to recognize God and to ask blessing from him, but I don't have to be all emotional about it. Like, here it is,
Yeah. That was my idea with the RPG prayer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You want to be more emotionless about it?
Not necessarily, but
I can be more robotic about it if you want.
No, but I just want to at least keep it like the same every week. And
maybe I can do some monotone chanting.
Sure.
Hallowed be thy name.
Yeah, if you want to, we'll bring a drum and start banging it. I don't know, but yeah. I don't know. Yeah, again, it is interesting, the idea of how much energy needs to go into it, like passion wise, it's like, I think a lot of that is manufactured, but I think when you do things willingly, let's say, and repeat them, then no matter what your energy levels are, it starts to have a transformative effect. And over time, it'll like start to just ingrain in your psyche, and then also you'll see like just different weird benefits from it, or ways it makes change in your life. And so, I mean, for me, it's like such a challenge going to church each week. I mean, I like it, but it's like it is mostly the same thing every week. And it's like, for me, I thrive on new experiences. So it's like as it kind of fades from it being a new experience to something that's just like a routine. It's like, I definitely start to be like, oh man, what am I, my mind just wanders, I guess. But then, I kind of stick with it. I've done a hard thing, grow in discipline, and all these like other small like tangential effects now that I'm realizing are there. It's like, just by being there and participating with people, like I'm building a bond with these other people, so it's like, you wouldn't really just like, I don't know. I always wanted the result without putting in the work, I'm like, why doesn't everyone just be like super good friends, or like, why can't I just be super good friends with somebody, just because I want to be, it's like, you have to kind of have some shared history with people to like, you got to put in the time before they'll like, feel deeply about you or whatever. And, just different things like that, where it's like, just by going and having a routine, you build up all these other things that you were not even looking for when you went. And so, I could see it being the same in prayer routine. So,
yeah, totally. Well, folks, I think what we've come to after all of that is that you have to pray for grace. Or maybe it's grace that you're able to pray.
I would say pray for grace. Yeah,
pray
for
for
sure.
Grace. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there's another thing I wanted to...
And pray that I make lots of money.
Yeah. Put it in the comments.
Put my Venmo
Yeah.
in the no.
Hey, people have done more
man.
desperate things in the past.
Yeah,
So.
I've seen it on the back of people's cars sometimes.
Oh,
They're
really?
like their Venmo
Jeez.
account or whatever as like a sticker, and it's like Venmo me because of whatever reason. I just graduated high school, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Weird. Well, I hope it works for them.
yeah. Hope that worked out.
Anyway, thanks for joining us.
That's right. Thanks for
And
watching.